first picture of the bridge? There we go.
Oh.
I don't think any picture better represents the division between this city of the period that we lived through and the period that has occurred since then. This picture was taken about 1981. You look at it, and there's the old bridge, the Ruby Lee,
Yeah.
and then this is the new Newport. It's going to overtake everything, and that's fine because that was what was decided by the people who lived here. But I think the thing that I would want to do is start. I was fortunate enough 4 years ago to do a presentation for the museum that was basically kind of the story of, I grew up in Newport Beach before it was the OC. And in that, I told a lot of the history of Newport Beach. So what I'd like to do is start with a video that I did that really showed me what Newport Beach once was. And so, let's,
Hit it, baby.
you need the mic. Oh, that's right. This is called jury rigging.
Yeah.
We found that we didn't have any sound on the video when we got it here, so we had to kind of
It's okay.
Figure it out.
We
figure it out.
adapt.
We adapt, that's right.
Do we sing?
No, we can if you know.
I think 1887. It's probably one of the first pictures ever done in Newport Beach. McFadden was a true believer that he was going to convert Newport Harbor into an industrial harbor. It was his hope that he would be able to spend $1.5 million and get the entire Newport Bay dredged. Now understand something, in 1887, $1.5 million is equal to $42 million nowadays. He was laughed at. No one was going to give him that kind of money to clean that bay out. He tried for a number of years to end up doing something to allow the operation to proceed in that location, but he was finally forced to create something we all know as the Newport Pier or McFadden's Wharf. And so that's where he took and put his money. Within a few years, it became obvious that San Pedro was going to be the big draw in this area, and McFadden basically lost interest in it. And the next person, and I'm hoping to remember it, it's William Collins. You can go to the next one. Now, this seems like a strange picture to have William Collins, but William Collins is the individual who developed this island. And he was a believer that he was going to make this a recreational place, not a commercial location. The thing I love about this is Park Avenue, and I can't remember exactly which one of these are, but here was his intent. We all know about Little Island.
Yeah.
He was going to have a little island. There was going to be a tiny island that was going to be located on the south side of the island. And the thing that's amazing is these are small enough lots that he was going to sell. I think he was probably selling these to maybe put tent sites up or something of that sort. When the final planning was done, they never did include this little canal that was going to surround it. And it's just one of those fascinating little facts that's kind of just been lost in history. One, if you ever get a chance to find it, is absolutely amazing, and I'll try to post it on the Newport site. There was an individual who several years after this was going to develop a place called Port Orange. Port Orange was going to be where Castaways is now. And they had a whole civic center. There was going to be hotels, restaurants, all kinds of residential, and it was going to encompass that whole area. Again, it was one of those things that just never followed through. By that point, most of the interest in Newport Beach had moved out to where McFadden had created the wharf. This was opening day. This is what changed everything. about Newport Beach? The red car. The red car, this was out in the middle of nowhere at that time. And with the arrival of the red car made it possible for people to come to Newport Beach. Hey, clicker, you just left.
She's gotta take pictures.
Newport Beach, for decades, was a vacation location. It was not a place that people lived year-round. This is one of my favorite. This is a family from, I believe it was Santa Ana, and they came here in the 1880s. These people are around 25th Avenue, or 25th Street on the peninsula. This salt marsh area behind them would become Lido Island. And if you look very faintly up in the corner there, that's McFadden's operation at Dover. So this was how originally people, now, go to the next one. Once Newport Beach began to grow, I happened to choose the Hotel Balboa as an example, but a number of hotels began to spring up. Sharp's Hotel was probably the first one that was here. Hotel Balboa, the one that I love, and I actually probably should have used, is the Hotel del Coronado that was down in Corona del Mar, and you would you'd land at a landing there and go up to the hotel. Okay, go to the next one. This is just some vacationers. Go to the next one. One of the things that was popular at one time, and it's hard to imagine, is they used to have speedboat races up and down the harbor. And you look at it now and it just seems almost impossible that it was like that, but that was something that was done. To give you a sense of what Newport Beach was like, in 1910, the population of Newport Beach was 445 people. By 1920, it had doubled to 894. By 1930, it had gotten to 2,200. 1940, it had doubled to 4,400. By 1950, it was 12,000. By 1960, it was 26,000. By 1970, it was 49,000. And by 1980, it had reached 62,000 people. It was one of those things that once people discovered it, they started to come here in droves. I make reference to the fact of 1936. That may seem like kind of an odd date to pick, but I picked it because that is when the harbor was finally dredged properly. What had happened is that with the advent of the Roosevelt administration, they were able to start doing governmental work on things like recreational projects. So there was a situation where, under the auspices of the Work Project Administration, they were able to dredge the harbor, and this finally realized both McFadden and Collins' dream. Boy, it was gonna be clear sailing after this, except one, oh, yes, there's the harbor. That's opening day. One little thing stepped in the way. Next. That kind of changed things. All the plans that they had for the city got interrupted for 6 years. It was a situation where you literally could not buy supplies to build houses. They said the biggest thing that happened during the war is that there was a lot of trading of properties back and forth. This occurring, though, was the impetus to start what became the Newport Beach we all knew. And that was that the Army Air Corps and the Marines had facilities here. There was the Santa Ana Army Air Base, which was located in a number of locations, one of them being around Orange Coast College, another being where the Orange County Airport is now. And then the one that people are always a little confused by is down where the Sea Scout base is. Well, the Sea Scout base was used because you had a lot of Midwesterners who were pilots who didn't have the slightest idea how to swim. And if you're gonna get shot down somewhere in the Pacific, you damn well gotta know how to swim. So they ended up training pilots in those type of activities you can go through and click a couple. This is the Santa Ana Army Air Force Base. This was an interesting thing. There was actually a contemplation early in the war about creating a West Coast Naval Academy. And it was gonna be created and put up here. Now, they never followed through with the idea, but I always thought that was kind of fascinating. So go to the next one. There's the Marines and their planes. And then, I think many of you may know this, that the Dory fleet was dry docked during the entire war. They had to fish from the piers. They could not go out in the ocean and fish. So that's kind of just an interesting side note. Who would come back after the war to start the growth of Newport Beach were those flyers and Marines. Okay. Now, I'll hand her the microphone. This photograph. This was the first one of these videos I did about 8 or 9 years ago. At the time, we were getting so many photographs on the site that I really thought, what in the world can I do? It's terrible. These are just kind of going to vanish over time because people will not be able to look at them. And Bethany here showed me how to make videos. So this is a video I made, and I think this kind of gives you an idea of what I'll be talking about over the next 20 or 30 minutes. Yep. Post-war boom would begin right after the war. Surprising. At the time that the city was incorporated, the city consisted of 1,100 acres. By 1956, it consisted of 4,799 acres. The first subdivisions that were built after the war, Bay Shores actually existed before the war, but basically nothing was able to happen with it because of the war. Other ones were Shore Cliffs and Bay Cove, Balboa Cove. One of the first major things that happened during this period was the creation of Hoag Hospital. This is going to sound unbelievable. The people who created Hoag Hospital purchased 10 acres up on that bluff where you see hospital now. It cost them $10,000 for 10 acres in Newport Beach.
Overlooking the water.
When they built the building, it cost $1.5 million. And to give you an idea of what that is in current figures, it would be if it was an $11 million building now. The operating budget for the hospital the first year was $450,000. I'd be willing to say there are probably some operations now that cost $450,000. One of my favorite things, and I'm trying to drop these in because these are always great. The first patient at Hoag Hospital was totally and completely illegal. The first patient at the hospital was the nephew of the Hoag family. And he was injured the day that the hospital was open to be toured by the public. They had not received their certification. He was not supposed to be admitted as a patient, but because it was the Hoag family, they brought him in. People going through the hospital thought he was a dummy. They didn't realize it was an actual patient at the hospital because there weren't supposed to be any patients back there. Oh, I got ahead of myself. Go ahead. There's the sign telling about the hospital. And those of us who've been here long enough, go to the next one. This, I know there's that giant facility up on the hill, and I know it does great things, but no matter how long I live, this is what I'll always picture when I think of Hoag Hospital, is that little multi-story place that my dad got a hernia operation and missed my brother's graduation from Harvard High School. About 1946, no, 48, you go next one. Richard Market opened. Everybody thought he would fail within a year. and he had generated revenue of $1 million his first year. And he became obviously a fixture. Obviously a fixture.
Yeah, that's right.
Go to the next one. There she is, Dorothy Johnstone, the organist.
Yeah.
Now, she was not the organist when I worked there, but I can remember whoever the organist was, we threatened to throw grenades up into that organ loft because she only knew 6 Christmas carols. And at the end of an 8-hour shift, you get pretty sick of hearing the same 6 Christmas carols. Okay, you can go to the next one. One of the interesting things is that the city had some kind of worthless land that was by the Sea Scout base. And so they decided to set up a 50-year lease to create a bake club. Unfortunately, I was going to put another picture in here, but I forgot to insert it. It's interesting because they did an advertisement in the early 50s that they talked about how easy it was if you lived in San Marino, if you lived in Santa Monica. They showed all of the freeway routes that you could make it down real quickly to Newport Beach. No. Well, maybe in the 50s, yeah, possibly.
No.
So they obviously ended up being a little bit more than just this sort of worthless land. Go to the next one. This has always been my favorite picture of the City Hall. They talked about how people on the peninsula just thought it was terrible that they moved it all the way up to the far end of the peninsula. That how could they haul it up? And I think to myself, good Lord, what would they think of where they put it and out there with the bison if they knew where it would end up in later years? Okay, next one. This is an interesting picture. There's Richards and there's the City Hall. And all of that empty space around them. Next picture. This is a shot looking from the top end of Back Bay down the bay. It's interesting here. This group of trees, I think to some degree is still there. Certainly was when I was a child. I found it fascinating because I never really thought about these trees. My house on Santiago Drive, we had 3 eucalyptus trees that were on the side of the house, and I never really thought about it. It's not like somebody comes in and plants eucalyptus trees. It certainly wasn't our builder. And I realized somewhere along here was where my house was, because that's that group of windbreak trees that were there. Hard to imagine that all of that became completely covered with houses. Okay? You can't talk about Newport Beach without mentioning the bohemian group of the people that were at Crystal Cove. And I think where every night is Saturday night and every Saturday night is New Year's Eve could not better explain what Crystal Cove was in its day. Okay, we go to the next one. So, one of the first major events that really began to bring people into this area, and they weren't really potential, well, they could potentially be home buyers and that kind of thing, was when the Irvine Company allowed, or the Irvine family allowed the International Jamboree, Boy Scout Jamboree to be held basically in the area where Fashion Island is now. This is a shot from that. Now, the interesting thing with this is that, yeah, maybe these were 10, 12, 13-year-olds, but they knew about Newport Beach now because they'd come here for the Jamboree. There was 50,000 scouts came here in 1953 to attend that. And they would later be ones that would come back and help develop this city. This, I love, this is Jamboree being built. I always wondered as a child, why in the world did they call that street Jamboree? Now, it seems like that was the name of a rock and roll show when I was a kid.
Oh.
No, I was Hullabaloo, sorry. But this is the creation of Jamboree in the mid later in the 50s. You can go to the next one. We had a number of interesting places. One of them was Porter's Buffalo Ranch. And this is just one of those things, it's kind of almost hard to imagine, but this was a popular attraction for about 10 years. It was a situation where, you know, you came out there, they had an Indian village, they had a trading post, they had all kinds of things. You got to go back to the Old West. They even had a spokesman. The guy's name was Tiny, and he weighed like 380 pounds. And he was famous for eating big giant hamburgers. You know, you were pretty easily entertained in the 1950s. You go to the next one. Now, one that has lasted a bit longer, this is Newport Dunes in the early years. Ever since the first time I saw it, it just is absolutely amazing to look at that background and to think there was nothing there. Nothing. And it was nothing for miles in every direction. It was just all of that land that the Irvine family owned. Okay, next one. Okay, now this is interesting because this seems to have nothing to do with Newport Beach. But this is Irvine Lake. Irvine Lake was created in 1956 because there was an opportunity to bring water in from the Colorado River, and that suddenly made Newport Beach have a substantial and a guaranteed source of water. Well, once you have a sustained source of water, then growth can just take off. And so that's one of the things. It seems like a minor thing, but it really had an effect on it. This next one will blow your mind. That is Ford Aeronautics, the day it opened. And to look and realize there's nothing between that and Saddleback. It was just hundreds and thousands of acres of land and nothing else around. Yeah, this is where what you began to see is that with the freeway system that was created in Southern California, companies in Los Angeles began to see the potential. Why not operate out of a place like Newport Beach? Why worry about being up here in Los Angeles when we can set up an operation like Ford did in 1959 to create, to have their operation be in that location, and then that gave reason for people to come down and live in Newport Beach in this area. Go to the next.
Tom,
Yeah.
your dad had was in the aerospace industry.
Yes.
And didn't he work in some way with Ford?
Oh, he worked with everybody in that industry. Yeah, he was well known within that industry. This is one of the earlier shots of UCI. I hope I'm remembering it, but I think that the Irvine family requested 2,000 acres to build the university. And the original land was granted in 1959, and the university opened in 1965, I believe. President Johnson came and spoke at the opening. This is a point where I would say we have what I call the second wave. This is the Fingers at Dover Shores. This is Santiago Drive along here. This is probably sometime, I think, about 1962. This is just one of the many subdivisions that began to go up. You go to the next one. This is East Bluff, early on. So right after the high school was built. And one of the things that they talk about is that as these subdivisions progressed, they became more involved with having different types of amenities in them. East Bluff was an example of that, where there were shopping centers that were literally built into the neighborhoods. You go to the next one. This is amazing. This is Irvine Terrace. Very early on. Almost hard to imagine that it once looked like that.
That's where Irvine Terrace.
Let's go to the next one. Yeah. Okay, Bow Week.
Yeah.
Bow Week was a tradition in this city from the 1940s, 1950s, and mid-1960s. As time went on, more and more the city really got kind of sick of the kids showing up at Easter and making a mess of the town. They did nice things like this. Somehow they thought if they took the benches off of Marine Avenue, that no one would loiter on Marine Avenue. So they sent the crews in there, and it's funny because one time when I printed this, somebody saw this picture and said, "Oh yeah, that's so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. I knew those guys." So you get that kind of stuff. Yeah, the fellow who really cracked down on this was a man named James E. Clavis, who was the police chief of Newport Beach, and he vowed he was going to end Bow Week, and he was very successful in ending Bow Week. At the time, go to the next one. This was when the Rendezvous was still a huge draw for the young people. Go to the next one. The prisoner of Socrates. But in August of 1966, with the actions of Mr. Clavis and with just fate, the Rendezvous burned down. It had burned down in the 1930s and they happily rebuilt it. When it burned down this time, nobody was interested in rebuilding it. And that period of our history kind of came to an end. Students found other places to go wreak havoc around Southern California. Okay? This is one that's so thankful that this never came to be. This was going to be the Pacific Coast Freeway. The Pacific Coast Freeway was going to run along the Pacific Coast, and this is the Balboa Bay Club of the early 60s. And groups began to fight it. One of them was called the Freeway Fighters, and they got a referendum put on the ballot, and it won 82.4% to stop it. And what they were able to do to finally get rid of the possibility of this is that there would have to be a vote by the people to allow a freeway to go through Newport Beach. And they knew that was never going to happen, so they just abandoned the idea. And that's the best thing that ever happened. I cannot imagine if there was a freeway through that. Okay, next one. This is where we begin to see the growth of Newport Beach. This is a very early shot, you can tell, because the only high-rise, is the medical building. This is probably about 1967, early 60s, probably fall or winter of 1967. Go to the next one. This, I love these because I found a group of these pictures. This is the opening night. I think it was September 9th or September 11th of 1967. I can remember my parents going to this. And I find it so funny because you look and you can see every guy has a white shirt on and a dark tie. And all the wives are dressed in their finery.
Fashion Island?
Fashion Island, yeah. This absolutely amazes me. That is South Coast Plaza. Back when there was nothing around South Coast Plaza. It's almost hard to imagine that it looked like this. You go to the next one. Okay, this is one of those ones I love. This is another one I love. I had seen this picture, and I had probably posted it on the Newport site, I don't know, half a dozen times, something like that. I just always thought, I remember thinking, man, I never had a teacher that good looking. It's a hottie. And the last time I posted that, somebody came on and said, "That's me." And I said, "What school did you teach at?" She goes, "I didn't teach school, I was a fashion model." They called me up and they said there'd be a bunch of kids and we'd all meet with some guys who were dressed like construction workers, and they were gonna do a promotional shop at South Coast Plaza. So, I guess I don't feel so bad. Maybe there wasn't that hot a teacher. Now, this is where, it's funny because when I started this site, I did a description of it. And I find this happens all the time on the site, is that somebody will mention something and you'll go, oh my God, I had totally forgotten that. And this one happened with me, is that a friend of mine who graduated with me at Harbor High School, Pete Brown, the day I started the site, he read the description of it, and I mentioned about the organist, and I mentioned about wheelwrights, and he said, oh, you've got to include water skiing in the back bay. And I thought, oh my God, yeah, people used to water ski in the back bay. And it's something that, it amazes me how many people really remember that. The reason I put this in is that about this time in the early 70s, the plans they had for what they were going to do to the upper Newport Harbor would have been just made astronomical changes, because Irvine really wanted to develop that whole area. They had all of that property that they could do something with. And a group of people, don't think I have their name, but yes. No, sorry, I do not have it on here. They began to fight to try to get the state to declare it a wildlife refuge. And it took a number of years, but they were able to finally stop it. And as we all know, you're not going to be water skiing anytime now in the upper Newport Harbor, but that's probably pretty good. It's nice to have that as a place. What we ended up having was a group of people who, it was a group called Spone, Stop Polluting Our Newport. And it was the group that really spearheaded trying to get the Back Bay converted to a wildlife sanctuary. I'm kind of at this point, there's a few additional points I can make, but what I wanted to now is to kind of mention a few things that just seem very interesting. We can go to the next one. How many of you recognize this? Did you make it in? Did you make it in? There is a, what is this? I think there's a white, kind of a modern white office building now where that used to be. What a lot of people don't realize is basically the whole length of the Pacific Coast Highway at that time was just dotted with these little mom and pop hotels, motor inns. That was how people would come here. That was where the transition had really begun, where this was such a vacation location and not a place where people live. So these places did great. As time went by, they became less and less important because more and more people were living here. They weren't just visiting here, they were staying permanently. This was the big transition. When the Newport Inn was built, the Newport Inn ended up being the largest, best facilities with respects to a hotel until the Marriott was built, like 15 or 20 years later. This is kind of a sidelight, but it's kind of sad. How many of you remember LA Airways? It's one of those things, it's funny because my one memory of it was trying to convince my dad, if we're gonna go to Disneyland, why don't we go over to LA Airways and fly the helicopter up to Anaheim? That seemed like a great idea to a 10-year-old. Well, it was just a great idea to my father. And the sad part is that that was such a feature here for a number of years, but tragically there was a couple of crashes that involved LA Airways. And in fact, the most ironic one is that the grandson of the owner of LA Airways was one of the people who died in one of the crashes. And the airline just never recovered from that. So it's one of those things that just, it happened, and it was a tiny slice of time here, and it'll never come again, I don't think. Now this one, This was the largest fire that ever occurred in Newport Beach. This was the Mariners Fire that occurred in January of 1975. It really, it was a situation where apparently there was not good fire breaks between each one of the buildings, and it started, I can't remember whether it started at the ski shop and went down to the paint store, or it went from the paint store, whatever it was, once it reached the paint store, paint cans started exploding. And they were shooting water from the bay to try to put the fire out. I happened to be home that weekend from USC, and oh man, that was something to go down and see that. Okay. What we have now is what I call the third wave. Our first wave was places like Bay Shores. Second wave was like Dover Shores. This is a shot of that refuse collection area that was going to be near Fashion Island, the dump. Of course, it later became Big Canyon. Most people probably don't realize that Big Canyon is built on a dump.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
You don't live
What did it become?
Big,
there. You don't live there.
Big Canyon, yeah.
I used to take me to lunch
below
in
the
that country club
dam.
there.
And they had built the dam in a certain area in case it would break, it would go down Big Canyon, which is now.
What-
Yeah.
what
Country
dam?
club.
There was a little dam on that hill, long ago, up where, near where the cemetery is.
Yes, the next one. Part of what, you start to reach a point that there's so many subjects. You could do a whole thing on the airport. You could do a whole thing on pollution in the bay. You could do things on so many different subjects. I always love this one because I like to point out the fact that those of us who lived here in the mid-60s, we used to be so bothered by the fact that 8 times a day, an Electra 880 flew over our house. Yes. And then you look at it and you think, man, we were in good shape when that was happening. You go to the next one. Now, this is just, what I'm trying to do here is just, I thought about it and I think, okay, I never surfed, so trying to talk about surfing, that's okay, because probably people will relate to that. Or sailing, or any one of the number of things. One thing that all of us can relate to is all the different restaurants that were around here when we were younger. This was, I don't necessarily remember whether the food was great at the Ruby League, but it was a great place to go. It was a big deal to go to the Ruby League. And I find it so funny because I have talked to people on the site. I used to always wonder, who the hell are those kids that are swimming down there below the gangway and people are throwing quarters to them? Well, now I got some 67-year-old guy saying, "Oh God, I used to swim down there and go for quarters." So, okay, I don't know whether you would recognize this or not. This is the only photograph I could find of the Castaways. This is what it looked like to sit at the Castaways and look out of the window of the restaurant. And this is even better, and it's such a shame. Go to the next one. Oh, that's not the right one. Oh, I think our sequence is screwed up. We might have. Go back. Well, what I was going to show you is some wonderful member actually sent me a menu, not a copy of a menu, but a menu from the Castaways. And it was in pristine condition. He said his family had it, and he just thought it would be great if I had it. This is one that's great because this shows you how you can have a situation where you're so accustomed to something and then you realize it's not, well, that one's gone, but the one, go to the next one, please. This was one that I always found amazing is I always assumed that Wheelwrights, they just built that building for Wheelwrights to be in. Never occurred to me that there was a restaurant that was there before that, and that's High Seafood that was there back in the 40s and the early 50s. Okay, you can go to the next one. Now, if you want to take a minute, just think back to what it was like. Wheelwrights was never a place that my family just would go to. Wheelwrights would be the place you'd go to, like the Lido Theater and see a movie, and then Dad would say, hey, you want to stop at Wheelwrights and get ice cream? So it's really something to be able to look and see the old Wheelwrights.
15 cents.
Well, they were there because Salem was only 5 cents.
Yeah,
It's 15.
yeah, 3 times the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had practical parents as opposed to my parents.
And then they drive all the way over right there, so you gotta say the
Yes.
Tom, do you remember the zoo?
Oh, yeah.
There was purple.
Yes, and you did swamp water, which was, you could pick anything you wanted and just have them mix it in your glass. Okay, go to the next one. How did we get to Ruby Lee again? I don't know.
It's okay, she's doing great, she's doing great.
There are certain places that it's still fun, that they're still here. God, everybody knows the Galley.
The Galley.
There's no better little restaurant in Newport Beach. Another one,
He's not paid to say that.
Charlie's Chili. And y'all may have lost it for a while, but. Yeah.
Who's bringing crab cooker tomorrow?
Okay. There's an old saying that was attributed to Isaac Newton. And he was asked why he had accomplished so much. And he said it was because he stood on the shoulders of giants. And that's how he was able to accomplish what he did. The sailing tradition of this, and I'm gonna mention this because I forgot it back earlier. One of the things that was said about Newport Beach during World War II is that some of the best naval commanders came from Newport Beach because the tradition of sailing was so important here that they had people who were master sailors. This is part of the reason. Some of the greatest yachts of that time, and it's a shame because I meant to write down these. I know this is the Goodwill. And I had them the other night on the site, but I can't remember their names.
Those are good. Over here, they have a bunch of them
I ain't the other way.
on the side, yep.
Okay, this is where I'm going to start. This is where I'm going to make my slight not political, but social comment. This is the Newport Beach of our youth.
You bet.
This is the Flight of the Snowbirds. And now, before you turn this to the next one, I want to say that the picture I'm about to show is an individual who I know personally. He was actually a fraternity brother of mine at USC. And I don't fault him at all for what I'm about to show. But go to the next shot. This is Rick Caruso's yacht, the Invictus. Rick is more than free to own a gigantic yacht like this. I praise him for being able to do this. But for me, Rick's yacht is what people now picture when they think of Newport Beach. They don't think of the Flight of the Snowbirds anymore. They think of the wealth. They think of the opulence. And it's very strange because people really don't understand that at one time this was just a middle class latent place. I mean, this was not some place of wealth and privilege. Go to the next one. This is just some of the funny ones. I love the fact that we actually had surfboard permits for 1 year. I mean, you want to talk about government interference. That is the epitome of government interference. Who remembers the fishing barge? There's some, and this one is kind of where I'll begin to wrap things up. This was, now, I think the negative's been reversed or some of things like that, but this was the way you got down to Little Corona.
Yeah.
Little
Big
Corona.
Was that Big Corona?
No, little.
Because the big one had the rock.
No.
No, Judy knows, she grew up there. Oh.
Regardless.
Those were the
Those
paths.
are the rocks at the bottom.
Yeah.
Big beach.
Regardless.
Yeah.
This is the Newport Beach of our youth. This really is. This is when, you know, it was just a different town. Go to the next one. This picture, it just, even as I drive through there now, it just seems to me, I'll always remember Newport Beach, leaving Corona del Mar, heading to Laguna Beach, and this is what you saw. Well, this didn't come out very good, but it probably is appropriate if it came out poorly. This is what you see now. This is, you know, and the thing is, again, I don't fault anybody for that. This is what people wanted. You know, it's not what I feel is the way I would like the city to be, but I don't have any say in it anymore. And it's something that, ooh,
Oh, that
that's
was good.
No, actually, I will go
That
with
was
that.
good.
Yes.
I like this.
Okay, I ended this story last time with this same thing, and I'll end it with this too. A number of years ago, Johnny Carson had Steve Landisberg on his show. And I don't know whether you remember, sometimes Johnny would get on some subject and it would carry through the whole show. It'd be something stupid, you know, and they'd laugh about it and they'd talk about it. And Johnny and them got talking about what would it be like if you were invisible. Can you imagine if you were invisible, what you could do? And it went back and forth, and finally Steve Landisberg came out. And Steve said, in that kind of country sort of way he talked, that, you know, at some point in my life, I figured out I was never gonna become invisible. And he said, I figured it was better to wish for a bike than to wish for invisible. And I just thought that was so great, and it's one of those things, that's what I say about this. The Green Hills are never coming back. It's a shame, I wish they were still there. You're never gonna be able to take your date to Ruby Lee for a meal. You're never gonna be able to water ski in the Back Bay anymore. But the thing that we've gotta do, and this is why I've always been so impressed with this museum, is that this museum is allowing people to realize what this place once was. It's great, it's famous. I mean, I've lived in Tennessee for 43 years. And when I first 20-some years that I lived in Tennessee, I would tell people I was from Newport Beach, and they wouldn't have the slightest idea what I was talking about. They'd ask me if it was outside of San Francisco or something like that. And I'd say, no, it's about halfway between Los Angeles. Oh, there's a place called Newport Beach now. After that inane show, the OC came on, anytime I would mention I was from Newport Beach, oh my God, what was it like growing up in the OC? And my favorite one, and this is insane, my broker at the real estate office that I worked at actually asked me how many kids came to school in limousines. And I kind of looked at him and I said, we rode to school on bicycles. Nobody came to school in limousines. So, you know, you never know. So, let's go to the next one. Okay, I'm gonna have to give you this. This is my wish. I made this song up. This was gonna be a Christmas song because I saw it on some advertisement that was Christmas oriented. So I thought, oh God, this is great. I'm gonna use this as a Christmas song. Well, when I played it and started to listen to it, it's an all the year song. It's a song that has such a wonderful message. And in some ways what I've told you tonight is fun, but in some ways what I've told you tonight is really sad. But at the same time, I listen to this and I think to myself, yeah, this is a wonderful thing to say to you all as we wrap up the evening. We'll have one more after this. Good. Yeah, that's it. Okay, just a minute. Okay, gotta say a little bit, pause it. Gotta say a little bit, the people who've watched been on the live site know this song. I decided to use the song Classical Gas as the background for some pictures of Newport. I had a situation where when I first started doing these, I used a service called Vimeo. Vimeo couldn't care less what you put on there. Well, over time, they got in a lot of trouble, and so they started pulling people's stuff. This is an example of something they pulled. I was able to create a way to show them. I can't show it through a video system, but I can show it within our group. And when I got the last information on this has been viewed like 30,000 or 40,000 times. And I even looked into it. It was the oddest thing. One of them, there's 1,500 times it was shown on some Mexican truckers. What? But this, in 2 minutes and 55 seconds, will show you everything you want to know about Newport Beach before the OC. You all have any questions? Get your papers out, we're gonna be short quiz.